Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, Krishna Vedula here from University of Massachusetts Lowell. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good and whatever time of the day you're at. I'm going to get this thing started, and let's see. We have. I'm going to take over the screen for just a second to introduce our speaker, so that then she can get started with her talk. All right. So now we have the audience view is on my screen, and I have the distinct pleasure to introduce a very good friend of mine, Stephanie Farrell, and a very distinguished colleague. She is a professor and founding chair of experiential engineering education at Rowan University, United States, and very, very active in the global community of engineering education. Today, she will talk to us about research-based strategies for creating inclusive classrooms in engineering. Very, very important topic indeed. We have all over the world, we struggle with how to make sure that our classrooms include, people who are normally not represented in these kinds of environments. Okay, so we have Stephanie, who is has a very distinguished background. Just to read out a few highlights. She is the 2018-19 president of the American Society of Engineering Education. So if you're all planning to be there, it's at Tampa in just a few weeks. You'll get a chance to see her. Then Dr. Farrell has been recognized nationally, internationally for contribution to engineering education through her work in experiential learning and promoting diversity and inclusion. She was the 2014-15 Fulbright Scholar in Engineering Education at Dublin Institute of Technology, Ireland. She was awarded honoris causa in engineering education from the Internationale Gesellschaft für Ingenieurpädagogik, IGIP. She has been honored by the American Society of Engineering Education with several teaching awards, and her research interests include inductive teaching methods and the development of spatial visualization skills. So with that, I'm going to now hand over the screen to Dr. Stephanie Farrell, and that will just take me a few seconds to do that. Okay, Stephanie, you just need to click show my screen, and you are on. Go ahead.
Okay, you see me?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can see.
Great.
You, yeah.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. And Krishna, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm not able to navigate.
Go down to the left and arrows.
Okay. No, it's working now.
Yeah.
Okay, it's working. Thank you. All right. So before we get started, I just want to give a shout out to the National Science Foundation. A lot of the work that I'm going to be talking about was developed through 3 different grants where we've developed inclusive content and pedagogical strategies for making classrooms more inclusive. So I just want to start out by talking a little bit about the importance of diversity in engineering. Probably if you decided to attend this webinar, it's something that you're already familiar with the importance of it. But we have an international audience here, so I want to point out that the meaning of diversity is different in different contexts. So, different places around the world, but in every culture, there are groups who experience barriers to participation in higher education, and even more so in engineering. And so what I hope to talk about today are some general strategies that work to make engineering classrooms more inclusive for all students, including those groups. So let's think about the engineering profession today. We practice engineering in a world where society and technology are changing faster than ever. Population growth, limited natural resources, global warming, all of these things create enormous challenges, and technological breakthroughs present an abundance of opportunities. But to meet the future needs of society, there is a critical need to expand and diversify the engineering workforce. And this is one of the biggest challenges facing our profession today. So this is a little bit of data and some studies that were done in the United States. But I think we different cultures around the world. So back in 2012, there was a call for 1 million additional STEM graduates, which represents a 34% increase over the rates the current rates at that time. And they needed 1 million additional STEM graduates by the year 2022. So we're getting very close to that, but we still need more graduates. A viable way to increase the number of graduates is to increase the retention. The retention in engineering, at least in the States, is sort of notoriously low. And a key reason that people have for leaving STEM fields is the unwelcoming climate. And the unwelcoming climate, of course, has a disproportionate effect on minorities. So we're losing minorities at a greater rate than we lose the majority students. There are really well-established benefits to diversity and inclusion in the classroom and in the workplace. So in the classroom, creating an inclusive climate benefits all students, and having diversity among the students and the faculty is essential to the intellectual and social development of all students. In the workplace, diversity increases innovation and productivity, and creating an inclusive climate increases employee engagement by about 30%, which in turn increases productivity. If we just take a quick look at the completion rates for STEM aspiring students, this again is data from the United States, but I imagine if you take underrepresented groups in different countries, you're going to see similar things. So the 4-, 5-, and 6-year graduation rates for underrepresented minority students are substantially lower than the completion rates for the majority students, who are the white and Asian students in the States. So in that previous slide, we're talking about racial and ethnic minorities. So that's one type of visible difference. But we also have to consider that there are other groups who experience exclusion or barriers to participation in engineering, and there are also in the States and in many countries around the world, women are underrepresented in engineering. But we also have students with disabilities, first generation to college students, students from rural areas, LGBTQ students, and other non-traditional students. So when we lose these students, we end up with a workforce that looks like this. So there are gaps in our workforce. And for every hole that you see in this picture, that represents missing talent from the engineering workforce. It's missing talent, missing perspectives, missing experiences, missing ideas. So we're really losing potential. And what we really need is a workforce that reflects the diversity of the markets that we serve. And so if we can do this, we'll get an engineering workforce that looks like this, where it's more balanced, and we fill in all those gaps of the missing talent and missing experience. In order to achieve this, engineering educators will have to change how they teach and who they teach. They'll need to recognize, recruit, cultivate, and retain untapped talent from a diverse population. And they'll have to create an inclusive culture, which is essential for learning, development, engagement, and retention. So I don't want to downplay the complex factors that contribute to diversity and inclusion in engineering. There's no sort of easy fix for this problem. It's a huge challenge. The barriers and factors that contribute to this problem include everything from organizational and structural barriers to individual behaviors. And in my talk, I'm really going to focus on the things that we can do as individuals, because we can control those things more easily. And there's a lot of things that you can do yourself to make your classroom more inclusive. So basically, we're focusing on creating more inclusive learning environments that serve the needs of students with diverse backgrounds who are in our classes. Okay, so let's think about the impact of culture for a minute. The social, psychological, and structural dimensions that contribute to the culture of STEM education influence the way students connect their personal identities to their academic domains and how they view themselves as learners in those domains. So this kind of becomes their academic identity, and that's connected with their personal identity. And it shapes their sense of belonging in engineering, and it shapes their self-efficacy. So subsequently, this affects their efforts and their achievements. The way it affects the efforts and achievements, it goes way beyond the predictions that would be based on socioeconomic and academic indicators. So the culture really has an impact on the student achievement. Okay. So what should I do? To just things that you can do yourself to make a more inclusive classroom in engineering. So this academic climate that individual students experience in college is a combination of their perceptions and their interpersonal interactions, their expectations and the norms, and their perceptions of what is valued. So a lot of this messaging happens in the classroom through interpersonal interactions that are directly related to coursework. And as engineers, we don't always think about how important it is for students to bring their personal identity into the classroom, but it's really essential for people to be able to do that, and for students to do that from healthy academic and professional identities. So it's essential for learning and motivation that students feel a strong sense of belonging, a sense of community in the classroom, and to know that they can contribute and that their contributions are valued. Okay, so now we get on to some of the tips. So let's think about the way you start your class on the first day. Usually start with something like, going over the syllabus, right? So one thing that you can do is to include a diversity statement on your syllabus. And really more than a diversity statement, I'd say an inclusion statement. So you can find examples of diversity or syllabus diversity statements on the web. And then I'd suggest not just copy pasting something, but really thinking about what they say and then changing it around so that it becomes personal for you, because this has to be something that you're really expressing your values and your commitment to diversity and inclusion in your classroom. So it should express what you're committed to. So I think some of the important things to include in a message are things like that students' contributions are valued, that identity is important, that you encourage students to bring their identity to the classroom, their personal identity. It sets expectations for behavior in terms of respect for all groups and visible and invisible differences. And it opens the door for suggestions and improvement. So you always want to do that because it makes students feel like they can approach you more easily if there are any issues. So in this statement that I show, Krishna, are the slides going to be shared?
Yeah,
going to be available for people?
Yeah, they'll all be shared, video and everything.
Okay. So I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but it mentions a lot of different groups to show that it's important to recognize students from all these different groups and backgrounds, and then it hits those 4 points that I just mentioned. Okay. So another thing that you can do on the first day is respect students' name and pronoun use. So if you bring, usually you come to class with a class list, right? And you're calling attendance on the first day and starting to learn the names of students. So if you just bring the roster with the last names and then ask students for their first names, they can tell you how they like to be called. And also provide an opportunity for students to tell you their pronouns. So one way to do this, a simple low-tech way, is just to give every student an index card and ask them to write a few personal things about themselves and maybe give it to you in the next class. That helps you get to know the students. If they put a picture on the card, it helps you learn their names. But also, you know, just ask for their names and their pronouns on that card. Okay, another one is to openly discuss accessibility and accommodation. So a lot of universities will have some like standard verbiage you have to include on the syllabus about accommodations. If you're not required to, then I recommend that you do put something on the syllabus anyway. But I think more important than that is to talk about it on the first day and just make it easier for the students to approach you if they do require accommodations. So a lot of times students don't like to ask, but if you talk about it on the first day and you seem really sincere about it, then students are more likely to feel comfortable approaching you to talk about it. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about identity. So identity matters. In engineering culture, we kind of tend to downplay the importance of identity, especially personal identity. And a lot of people understand, they'll say like, you know, I understand, I don't care who you, but you know, in the classroom, everybody's the same. But that's the point, I guess. I think that, you know, I encourage you to care who people are, and in the classroom, everybody's not the same. They should be treated equitably, but students have different backgrounds, different experiences, and different identities. And if we embrace that, I think our community will be much stronger and people will feel more comfortable. There's a strong sense of norm in engineering, and we kind of expect people to conform to it, to fit in. And we make unconscious assumptions all the time. Everybody does it, but sometimes these unconscious assumptions conflict with our conscious values. So, you know, we're really not aware, and we would even be surprised maybe to learn that we're making these unconscious assumptions. So we make assumptions about what we expect engineers to look like, what we expect the background of our students to be, what's familiar to them, what's meaningful to them, what's important. We base our expectations for success on how people look or dress. And I can say, you know, personally, I've been told countless times that I don't look like an engineer, and I don't really know what that means. You know, being female or being blonde, as I was once told by a professor, changed people's expectations of my achievements. So I think, you know, the more we kind of become aware of that and encourage students to be themselves, the more comfortable they'll be. And along those lines, it's really important to seek out positive role models to expose students to. So, you know, if you look in engineering textbooks, they really don't talk much about people at all. And if they do, it's pretty hard to find examples of contributions from people from diverse and marginalized backgrounds. So if you do a little bit of legwork, or maybe, you know, have a group of students who might be working on a project with you, or even as part of a homework assignment, have students look for diverse role models in engineering, and you know, have students find role models that they can relate to, you know, who inspires them. So this is a really great way for students to you know, to see themselves, to see people who have similar backgrounds and experiences, who have succeeded in engineering. Okay, another thing you can do is to communicate a multicultural ideology. So it's uncommon to find examples of the individuals, like I said in the last slide, but also the traditional body of knowledge in textbooks tends to be very Western centered. So contributions from other civilizations and applications of technology in other societies are rarely emphasized. So you can communicate a multicultural classroom by bringing in examples from other civilizations. They could be modern, they could be ancient. But the more you mix it up, the more likely you're going to find things that are exciting to all of the students in your class. So some of these examples are from a paper by Donna Riley, who has written about inclusive classrooms in thermodynamics. And I like these examples a lot because I think if you can do this in thermodynamics, you can do it in any class. So underfloor heating in China, human or water-powered fans, water wheels, and the cooking stove and ice cream maker invented by American women in the 1800s. This does not, just because some of these technologies are ancient, it doesn't mean that you can't use them to illustrate advanced topics. So I found a really great paper on Chinese underfloor heating that did an analysis using some good mathematical modeling. It would be great for like a heat transfer course or something like that. So you can be very creative in bringing in lots of great multicultural examples. Also, using socially relevant examples really reaches students from non-traditional groups. So there's been a lot of research that shows that girls generally don't participate in engineering disciplines because they don't see it as a caring profession. So if we can kind of break down those perceptions, that can help bring in women. There's other research showing that female students leave engineering. So they're initially attracted to engineering, but they leave engineering for that reason. And then there's more research that shows similar things among minorities. Black and Latinx students tending to favor projects that are seen as having a social justice benefit rather than something that would benefit large companies, for example. So we can really, by using socially relevant examples, we can make meaning of engineering work and find things that, where students say like, oh, okay, that's great, I get it, let's do something with it. This connects to me, this connects to something that's important to me. So whenever students learn in something, they learn something that's in a context that's relatable to them, they're going to learn better. So you can use different strategies to make engineering relevant to all students. Besides just the socially relevant, anything that uses familiar examples, using examples that are relevant to individuals and their communities, some way that engineering applications can improve life in their community. And remember to use a diverse set of examples because you have a diverse group of students in your class. So this is an example that I really like because I think it's very elegant. So this was a course out at Colorado School of Mines, and it was called Social Justice and Control Systems Engineering. And so what they did was they took a textbook problem. So this is from a control systems textbook, problem in the back of the chapter. And this is just like a very classic problem, the way it's presented. So, you're given a problem, you're given a diagram, you're given some specifications, and you're supposed to do some calculation about this control system, and like find an answer and draw a box around it. And in this example, it's just a tank, like a generic tank, I don't think, yeah, with a liquid in it. And so what they did is they changed this problem. And now the tank is for a remote village. They want a grant to install a tank that can provide household water during the dry season. So suddenly it has like a social impact. And the problem becomes more meaningful. So you want to design this control system to ensure enough water for the village's needs and not waste water by overfilling the tank. And then after that, the rest of the problem is the same. So they give all the same specifications and you have to do all the same like technical parts to solve the problem. But it has much more of relevance and meaning to students. Okay. Next thing is to embrace an asset-based model of diversity. So a lot of the research on non-traditional students, when I say non-traditional, I'm including like all underrepresented groups. So underrepresented minorities, women, low-income first-gen, military veterans, single parents. So students from these groups will, that faculty approach diversity from a deficiency model. So we tend to focus on what these students lack. So it's important to have support structures for students who are underprepared. But one thing that we really haven't done very well is to embrace an asset-based model of diversity that values the unique strengths that these students bring to engineering. So we can think about funds of knowledge. This is a term that refers to skills and knowledge that students bring from places other than the classroom. So knowledge that they bring from their family, from their culture, from their work backgrounds, which can be crucial to engineering innovation, but it's often neglected in the classroom and in the curriculum. Traditional engineering curricula favor knowing that. So knowing like specific engineering principles, concepts, theories, instead of knowing how. So knowing how is knowing like the when, where, and why those principles are applied, and how to analyze engineering problems. And we have, our curriculum tends to be very linear. We have often large lectures and rigidly defined problems with like, you know, one answer. So those kinds of things all favor knowing that. And what happens is this translates into an engineering culture in which non-traditional students have practical skills that should be viewed as an asset, but they feel that their skills and experiences are undervalued. So there was a little bit of research that I'll just share with you because it's a very interesting finding. So some researchers out at the University of New Mexico found that what they looked at first-year engineering students and they compared the design skills of the first-year engineering students from traditional backgrounds, traditional, like, meaning, I guess, well-prepared science and math backgrounds versus students from rural backgrounds and low-income and first-gen to college students. Those non-traditional students had better design skills, and specifically their ability to design within constraints and their comfort with ill-defined and open-ended problems. Yet they perceived themselves to be underprepared, and they had less self-confidence because of the messaging they got about the importance of math and science, which they felt that they lacked in comparison with the other students. Okay, so some ways that you can make your classroom more inclusive through the activities that you do. So one thing is do things to encourage a growth mindset among students. In engineering, there's this common perception that technical ability is innate, or maybe it's fixed. And research on growth mindset shows that when individuals understand that their brains are malleable, they're more likely to embrace challenging problems, likely to work through them. This mindset, it can also be situation dependent. So like one person, their mindset can change based on their environment. So there's a really good TED Talk that I put the link down at the lower left of this slide. In this TED Talk, it's about a person who shares his personal experiences about breaking through a fixed mindset, and it was very dependent on the environment. So a couple of things that you can do to help students build mindset in your classroom. Give them time and space to attempt difficult problems. So make the problems challenging, but give them the space to work through it. They might not be able to work through it individually, but if you encourage collaboration, often teams of students can break through a challenging problem. Let them analyze and explore different solutions and discuss those solutions. And then if you make it a really safe place for students to discuss their solutions, even if they might have made mistakes or might be wrong, then those mistakes become a learning opportunity. So help them reflect on those mistakes and any misconceptions that they have, and then correct them or allow them to find their mistakes and identify them and correct them themselves, and then the learning will stick much better. Okay, and then another thing you can do that can be fairly simple if you, depending on your facilities at your institution, but rearrange the furniture. So it's the physical setup of chairs and tables and the way you present in a classroom. This can significantly, whoops, sorry, I had a diagram, but it's not showing up. So it can, the way you rearrange the furniture and the way you present can significantly influence learning. Instructional communication theory suggests that seating arrangements can impact how the instructor communicates with the students and how the students interact with one another. This impacts engagement, motivation, and focus during the class. So if you imagine, this is my picture showed, a traditional classroom arrangement where you just have rows of chairs like facing the front, and that would be set up most likely for a lecture where there's very little interaction between the professor and the students. And if you think about it, the students are sitting with their backs to one another. They're looking, every student is looking at someone's back, right? And just looking at the professor. So it minimizes student to student communication. It supports that sage on the stage lecture type of learning environment. And then the highest communication or highest interactions between the professor and the students occur just with the first row, or maybe along the middle of the classroom. So students in certain parts of the classroom are a lot less likely to be engaged. If you have the opportunity, you can break apart move the furniture around. There are many different ways to do it, but if you can do it in like pods where you have kind of like a cluster, a student sitting around a table or a few tables together, then this can be really advantageous for students to work in groups. So it encourages that peer-to-peer interaction. Anything you can do to get them to work in groups or even pairs with their classmate for a large portion of the class time is really good. And then more generally, that type of arrangement can communicate a type of community And it allows the professor to walk around and interact with all of the students instead of just the students in the first row of a traditional classroom. Okay. So at this point, I have some references, which if you're interested, you can go back and read any of those papers. And these are the papers from which I pulled some of the examples that I talked about. And I would be very happy to start a discussion and answer any questions that you might have, or hear suggestions from our participants about what you do to make your
fantastic
more inclusive.
Thank you, Stephanie. This has been a terrific presentation. Lots and lots of new ideas and concepts that will help us all improve what we do in our own classrooms. We have 121 people here today. Fantastic, great audience. And I think we should be amazed at the technology that has made it possible for us from all over the world, different corners, different time zones, coming together to share our common interests in improving engineering education. I do apologize that some of you might have had a little, some audio broke up a little bit once in a way, but I'm sure it has not deterred you from listening to everything that's going on. And I'm looking forward to comments and suggestions from the audience. Okay, so please use your texting feature and send your comments and questions. Keep doing that throughout the next 25 minutes or so that we have. I will read as many as I can. And I will occasionally go into my panelists here and see if I can get them to make a few quick comments. Let's see, there's a question from Alice Squires saying that what additional suggestions do you have for those of us who teach classes virtually? Okay, maybe have class meet time or not, maybe do have online class time or not. Any suggestions on that, on somebody who teaches virtually, like we are doing right now? We are meeting virtually.
I'd like to hear from our participants on this. I can give a couple of ideas, but my expertise is not in online teaching. So a couple of things I would do is try to get to know the people who are in your virtual class. You can do some of the same kind of things, have them, maybe fill out a little survey or something so you can kind of get to know them. Encourage interaction among the participants. So of course the way you do that is going to depend on the technology you're using, but if you're doing something that's synchronous, you can do breakout rooms and have your groups interact. If you're doing asynchronous, then you can have a discussion where someone posts something and then other people are supposed to respond to it. But I think what you want to encourage that here interact. And then also, but make sure that you're also involved in it as the instructor to facilitate and guide the discussion. A lot of the things, of course, you don't have to rearrange the furniture in a virtual classroom, but you can do a lot of those other things like the multicultural examples, socially relevant examples, and looking for role models. So bring people in as much as you can into your work. Talk about people who contribute to engineering, talk about the impact of engineering on people. All of those things are really important. Okay. If other participants have more experience with online teaching, I'd love to hear their ideas.
Great. Let's quickly go to a couple of panelists here while other comments or questions coming in. Please send in your questions. I want to get to Ramiro and Hans and Uriel and Elsie just to give them a chance to talk a little bit. Ramiro, jump in. Any thoughts from your end? President of IFES, Ramiro? Or I can get to Hans, comments from Hans.
This is Hans. Stephanie, yeah. I find your presentation to be one of the most creative, thoughtful presentations I feel honored to have listened to in the series of IFES. The fundamental question is, given the role that IFES has globally, working with the equivalents of the ASEEs and others, how can we expand this kind of thoughtful conversation, learning and teaching for the next 3 to 5 years? It's just very exciting, and I appreciate your creative, thoughtful work. Thank you.
Elsie, do you have any comments, Elsie? Hello? Yeah, go ahead. Who's that? Ramiro? Go ahead, Ramiro.
Go ahead. I'll wait.
No, that's okay. Come in, Ramiro, and then Elsie.
Okay. So thank you very much, Stephanie. It was I echo what Hans just said. I've been working way too many years in Latin America through ISTEC and then now worldwide. As a chair, bringing a lot of this technology methodology to students is done individual by certain faculty. How, as a chair, how do you encourage your faculty to be more open to using all these different technologies and talking about real issues like the 17 SDGs? That is a challenge that I see. And also traveling the world, I mean, there's no incentives for faculty to really change their way they teach and bring in new subjects. Can you share some ideas on how we can really, this is something what we're looking for IFES and the international community. I mean, if we're going to make a change, we need to create some mechanisms, some incentives to people to jump in the new ways.
There's a question from the audience also.
Thank you.
Anna Lazarin said the same thing. What suggestion do you have for getting faculty to adapt these practices? Comments on that, Stephanie? And we'll go to Elsie after that.
Okay. Yeah. Is the sound okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, once in a way it's breaking up, but can't be helped. That's technology.
Okay. So I think there's a couple things that have to happen. One is that, it helps to have a champion in every college or department to share these ideas with faculty. And I think one thing that faculty need to understand, and I don't think that they're resisting this. I think they really don't know what is the damage if you don't do these things. So, show some of the data, show and try to get people to understand how we are excluding certain people and certain groups of people from engineering, because we're very used to our own culture and we don't see how what the norms are. We kind of take this for granted, and so I think people have to start thinking about it a little more actively. So if you can talk to people about them some of the numbers and give some examples, it really helps. Another thing is to have support some kind of community where you exchange ideas and try things out in your class. These are pretty low risk things that that you're doing in the class, but just to exchange ideas so that you can like cross-pollinate and start to build your toolbox of inclusive teaching ideas. So some kind of community of practice, or like brown bag lunch group or something like that can really help. But the bottom line is, I think we're all really busy, and people are going to prioritize things that they think are valued. So that's where the institution comes in, and the leadership has to show that work in this area is important and it's valued, and it has to be something that everyone embraces. Otherwise, we're never going to have a culture change. So that's when you have to start talking about working this into like tenure, recontracting, promotion, whatever you have at your institution, that it's part of the performance evaluation. And so if everyone's evaluated on teaching, then if you can show that in your teaching dossier, show that you're doing these things, it should count. So I think it really, the leadership plays a big role, and there has to be buy-in that not only is in the performance evaluation, but it really counts.
I'm going to read out one question from an interesting comment from Julia Roos here before I go back to Elsie. Julia says, it seems important to address how to handle those students who are traditional and may find relevant and diverse examples and problem sets unsettling or unnecessary. Okay, can you say suggestions how to head off those students who find this discussion about diversity unsettling to them. So how to head off those. It's also important to remind participants it's okay for those students to sit with their discomfort, which can help reset the power dynamic in the classroom and start change the balance in the broader environmental engineering context. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. That's a great question, and you do see that. You will see, you know, sometimes active resistance among students, especially when you mention things like social justice, which some students really believe should like not be used in the same sentence with the word engineering. So I think, you know, having a balance of different types of problems. So, you know, you don't want to make your class like swing the other way where you know, you're only talking about examples from that might be relevant to like working in a nonprofit in a developing country, because you have students in your class who are interested in working for big industry and high-tech solutions. So having a balance, having a mix so that they don't feel excluded is important. But also, you know, really emphasizing that engineering decisions always impact people, and engineering design, engineering work, whatever you want to call it, it impacts people, and talk about that. I mean, that's regardless of what sector you're working in, it's going to have an impact on people. So I think it's important to know how to soften it a bit and make it relevant for those students, so they don't resist, so they don't feel like it's an attack on them or something like that. And then, you know, sometimes you have to have difficult conversations, and, you know, just try to get students to maybe explore their own beliefs and their own perceptions about like what engineering work is. And, you know, I think sometimes students might think that engineering work is only a high-tech kind of work. And if you're doing something with a social impact, then it's not rigorous or it's not real engineering. But show them where the real engineering is in these examples.
We're going to move on to Elsie. Come in, can you?
Thank you. Thank you. Stephanie, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'm just moved to see the parallels in the business world. The same kind of challenges exist. We talk about it in terms of humanizing business and creating context and meaning. And it's, you know, it may sound like it's coming from some kind of thought leadership angle, but actually when we look at, as you started your presentation with, the social problems and challenges that we have, really our system, it's a systems reality, and we're all adjusting to the fact that nothing happens in a vacuum. But in this particular case with diversity, what we're finding in business is even those of us who consider ourselves inclusive will come across unconscious bias. And it's a very big movement now in the business community to not only train the rank and file, but the leadership in recognizing with humility our built-in biases. Before we can actually expect employees to do it, we have to do it. So I'm just wondering, what are the mechanisms, and this may be related to what Ramiro was asking, what are the mechanisms to support faculty in their personal transformation in terms of a growth mindset from a fixed mindset?
Okay, go for it, Stephanie. Thank you, Elsie.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, you know, that's going to depend. That's going to be very dependent on the institution. And I can say the way we're approaching it at Rowan, we're developing an inclusive pedagogy certificate that now all new faculty in engineering are expected to complete this. But we're working with people university-wide also to make this available to faculty in all colleges, all departments, and also make the inclusive pedagogy curriculum relevant to different disciplines, business and humanities and education, as well as engineering. So, you know, having that support there, you know, workshops and supporting faculty as they develop content and examples for their classes is important. But also, like what you said, some of the, what I would call like prerequisites, like you have to have a certain understanding about unconscious bias, implicit bias, and even, you know, barriers, the barriers to participation. So as part of our certification program, we have some kind of introductory workshops that give faculty a chance to explore some of these things. And there's like a general part to them, and then there's a discipline specific part where you explore the culture of your own profession, because the norms and expectations in every profession are a little bit different. So so we have a chance to explore that and how those norms might be exclusionary.
Okay, I'm gonna use the same technique here to go diversify a little bit of the audience here, the text people that we have 100 people in the audience, and many of them are from India. So a couple of questions here from our Indian participants who are out there. One, Deepak Vaikar points out something that's interesting. It's diversity in terms of cultures. Many engineering students from India, they do not talk or ask questions and ask questions in a class. How do you deal with that kind of diversity?
So is it?
I mean, you've experienced that, right? In a class full of students, you have Indian students or Asian students. They have this sense of respect for the teacher, and they won't ask questions, right? But go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a kind of thing. You have to explore and find the thing that works right in that culture, because those kind of behaviors and attitudes are they go very, very deep. And a student certainly is not going to feel comfortable doing something that they feel is disrespectful, at least in some cultures. And so maybe you could try, if you have students who are very reticent, maybe have them write down their questions on a card and then submit them, and then you pick out a few to read to the class. You could try something like that, or have them write down a question and exchange with a neighbor, and then the neighbor asks the question. You know, try calling on people, but you don't want to make people really uncomfortable by calling on them. So I think you have to kind of feel what works in that culture and for those individuals.
Another comment from Dharmadhikari from India is
another thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing is that they might feel more comfortable asking questions of each other. So if you give them a chance to work in groups, and then maybe have them come up with a question and ask their neighbor instead of asking you, and then at the end see if the group has any questions that they want to ask to the instructor.
Mm-hmm. Another aspect to the diversity in India is that many colleges have students coming in from agricultural backgrounds, and so non-traditional in that sense compared to those who come from the city. Mm-hmm. So Dharmadhikari says some of what we do is we look at the strengths of the traditional students. Some of our students are agriculture domain, but weak in engineering. We group them in, with traditional students to engage ideas and work together. We use around the table arrangement for students to work and participate together. So he's telling you a little bit about what they're doing, which is good job. A lot of your comments and questions that I'm seeing, particularly from our Indian colleagues, relate to more traditional dynamic classroom, project-based learning, and flipped classroom. Unfortunately, we will not have time to address those. I'm trying to look for comments which are particularly relevant to the culture of the diversity in the student body. So while I do that, anybody else? Uriel, you want to make any comments? You come from Uriel is still here. Oh no, Veena, I'll give Veena a chance to. Veena, jump in.
Yeah, Stephanie, congratulations. Wonderful presentation. Yeah, I think in one question that I could ask is, in India, we have a lot of students with diverse language capabilities, the competence in language. is again something that's, I think, has to probably be addressed, not at the faculty level, but any suggestions for managing a class with a lot of differences in linguistic competency in English?
Yeah. So I know that that's a big challenge, and I agree that probably the solution is something that has to take place like before they get to the class, right? So whether it's through a bridge program or some kind of support, language support or something like that. But you have who you have in your class, and I'd say try to focus, remember that asset-based model of diversity. So find the strengths of those students. Being from agricultural or rural backgrounds, they're likely to have very good practical skills and be curious about applications and have those kinds of insights, and have design skills, dealing with ambiguity and open-ended problems, and try to focus on that because it's really important for them to feel like they have strengths that are valued. And then meanwhile, I think explore opportunities for support structure.
Yeah, somebody suggesting assign interpreters in class for language. But that's an interesting question all over India, particularly in the north and the south. Anywhere in India, you have now that new students are coming in from the rural background, their English language skills are very poor. And so some faculty members are being creative and actually use Indian language phrases and teach a little bit in the local language just to give a level of comfort to the students who are not that familiar with English. So what do you think of that approach of using a little bit of the classroom time to teach the engineering subjects in the local language?
Yeah, I think anytime, it's another way of connecting, another way of showing that you understand their background, or that's important. You're not turning it into a language class, but you're showing that their background is important to you. So I think that's a very good idea.
Let me end with we just got a couple of minutes left. Something that it's my question now. It's something that's been bothering me a lot since my work with India. It has become accepted in many of these engineering colleges to talk about slow learners. Granted, they see a class of 60 students and they find maybe 20 or so of them are not able to keep up with everybody else, and they brand them as slow learners and talk about them as slow learners in front of them. And that bothers me, because that I'm sure must have a psychological impact on those students who are being branded as slow learners. So I get upset anytime a faculty member in India talks about their slow learners and how to improve what you do for slow learners. And I don't know, what is your advice to get this word out of the vocabulary of faculty who think that it's okay? I mean, this is a well-meaning faculty, and they talk about slow learners and how to deal with them. And what are your thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, I think doing exactly what you're doing. This is probably something that people use with their intentions are not bad, right? But it's just become the norm of the language, and so the people who are using it don't even notice it, but the people who are the target probably feel pretty bad when they hear it. So and pointing that out, getting people on board, and just gently correcting, come up with another word for this group and say, well, what do you really mean? And suggest a more affirming term for that group of people.
Somebody says they're not just no slow learners, just incompetent faculty.
So Krishna, can I just add here?
Yeah.
How we would take it. Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Veena.
Stephanie and Krishna, we both Krishna and I are very bothered about this term, and we tried to tell them that please don't use something else like people needing more support or whatever. But the big shock that came to me in this last workshops that I held in India was that the NBA actually is asking them to use this word.
This is National Board of Accreditation in India.
Yes.
Like the ABET talking about slow learners.
Yes, so I think we have to approach this at that level.
Highest level, yeah. Yeah, big challenge. I'm going to give the back to Hans, who wants to close up. We just got 30 seconds. Hans, go ahead.
I just want to make a final comment. What comes to mind with all the complexities, the need, and this is another organization that's closely linked to IFES, is to work with the deans and rectors of the universities to have them aware that they need to support the faculties in terms of addressing and dealing with these creative, important issues. The other one, in terms of talking about slow learners and other multicultural dimensions, the increasing need to work with other departments of linguistics, of anthropology, psychology, that help and bring them into the dialogues in terms of those kinds of issues, I think is very critical. And it's not happening enough in the engineering profession globally.
Okay, on that note, and thank you all for a fantastic dynamic discussion, and thank you, Stephanie, for a wonderful presentation and thought-stimulating presentation. And from everywhere around in the world, thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.